how am I going to do things? I collect all this data. How can I innovate? This is going to kill everything. Dude, that's not the case. Privacy can actually enable innovation. So for most of my professional life, I've been thinking about grim, meat-hook dystopian futures. That everything is broken, everything is terrible, and when you're a privacy professional, a lot of the time you swoop in, you tell people everything you're doing is wrong and terrible, and then you fly away. And so that's a problem, because people still need to do business. There are things that we can do with technology that will make the world a better place. So how do we bring these things together? So yes, privacy does actually enable innovation. So, again, grim dystopias. There are things that are happening right now that can put you off technology. So, people have stalkers. If you don't think about this as a company, you will have an embarrassing news story, because stalkers are early adopters of technology. They will actually enlist other stalkers who are more technically adept to get at their victims. You need to think about these things. Loss of employment due to political opinions, health status. Your users have to think about losing the roofs over their heads and their employment opportunities. Their plans can get wrecked by this stuff if you don't think about it. There was a guy who was working for a small business who was researching cancer drugs and got fired because in the States, healthcare is privatized and it's a nightmare, and that one employee could have made the healthcare costs for that entire company go up significantly. He got fired. One of the problems with this story is he didn't have cancer, his pet did. But again, think about privacy. It has real impacts on people's lives. Surveillance of journalists and activists. Authoritarian regimes are early adopters of technology. If they can find a journalist's source and go harass them based off of some sort of commercial technology that somebody is using, they will. Your mobile phones are tracking devices. Turn off location services, they're still tracking devices. Your customers should not have to think like spies in order to preserve their privacy while using cell phones. Because the answer that a lot of privacy professionals have, swooping in, stop using your cell phones. That's something that I am tempted to do. Tracking devices they make me unsettled, but opting out of these things is a privilege. If you are a programmer who has more freelance work than he can handle, and your customers have to come to you for your services, that's a privilege. If you work retail, you need that cell phone to keep the roof over your head. Hate mobs and doxing. Twitter can be a cesspit if you come from an underrepresented group. If you're a woman with an opinion online, it's highly probable that people will post your address and send death threats to your children for having an opinion online. There are people who are not with us on stages, giving talks, teaching people about technology, because this has happened to them. You have to think about these things. Manipulation of politics. Facebook didn't design their social network with the Russian government in mind. They're thinking about it now. So, all this stuff can really put you off technology when you think about it day to day, which is why if you follow InfoSec Twitter, we're thinking about giving it all up, moving to a sheep farm that is off the grid, maybe even building a Faraday cage around the barn. So if you see a lot of sheep and goat pictures among InfoSec Twitter, this is why. But again, opting out is a privilege. There are still people who are affected by choices in technology. And when the people who are most adept at thinking about these things give up their cell phones, move off the grid, swoop and tell everybody to stop using this thing, then the people who could help the ones who can't opt out are absent from this debate. So this is why my work is going to companies and helping them think of these things. Enter the GDPR. This is all the privacy thinking with teeth. This is the thing that shocks a lot of people. If you don't think about privacy, if you ignore all the advice, if you don't follow industry best practices, 4% of global income, or 20 million euro, whichever is greater. That's a death sentence for a startup. So starting in May, people have to think about these things. Investors are going to be thinking about these things. The good news is a lot of the things under the GDPR, it doesn't actually talk about specific tech because that would be out of date. It's just industry best practices, appropriate technical and organizational measures to protect data. That's what you're obligated to do. The other good news is that this can actually help you gain customer trust and help innovation. So, consent. Consent and data protection. Consent has to be freely given. It has to be explicit. For instance, if you're using a map app, you see the little blue dot moving around, that's a clue that it's tracking your location. That is not, however, explicit consent. It has to be plain language, and your user interface design has to make that choice explicit. If your gathering of data does not actually help delivering of services and it's optional, it has to be optional. People can withdraw their consent to the data gathering and use, and the withdrawal of that consent has to be as easy as giving it. But this is not something that we should fear. Consent is good. Explicit consent is good. Why would you want to instill fear in your customers? Why would you want to annoy your customers? That's bad. That's something that nobody should have been doing in the first place. So, breach notification. If you mess up, you have to tell your customers. If their data is at risk, you have to tell your customers. You also have to notify the Data Protection Authority in your country as well. This is something that should have been happening. Anyway, the penalties arise if you really, really mess up and you weren't taking steps to protect data. Getting hacked itself doesn't mean a death sentence for your startup or business. Not taking these things into account does. Right to access. Your customers have the right to know what you're collecting about them and what you're doing with these data. Right to data erasure. Again, consent can be withdrawn. Right to data portability. If somebody wants to go to one of your competitors, you have to provide the data in a machine-readable format so that people can take it elsewhere. Again, competition is not something that anybody that is providing something useful should fear. So, privacy by design. This is the planning stage where the privacy professionals, the unpleasant people who tell you that you're doing everything wrong, you have to bring them to the table early. I'm sorry, but it's useful to do this thing. So make sure that whatever technology you are designing, think about privacy from the early stages. You also may need, depending on the size of the company and what kind of data you're collecting, you may need a data protection officer. This is a person within your company or an external person who helps you do risk assessments, plan everything, and also is your connection to the Data Protection Authority. Now, they have an obligation, if you really mess things up, to notify the Data Protection Authority. So this can inspire a little bit of fear in companies, but they should be a good ally in making better products. The other thing, coming from a privacy activism standpoint, that I really love about the GDPR is it has special categories of people that need extra protection, and you have to do risk assessments and think about the implications of breaches on these people. Race and ethnicity. That can be dangerous information depending on where your customers are. Political opinions, religion or philosophical opinions. Trade union membership is a protected class. Gathering genetic data means that you have more obligations. Biometric data, so if you can use a technology to identify an actual person, you have to store these data more carefully. Health status and sex life and sexual health. You have to think about these things. So, but then a lot of companies think, oh God, there's a lot of these things that I have to think about, I have to do planning, without risk, there's no innovation. How do I do these things? Your customers are not astronauts, okay? There are some similarities with innovation. Okay, you need to take risks in order to innovate. And every time there's an accident in spacefaring that has the potential to take us backwards. Again, risk, it's part of the human endeavor. I get it. And what the similarity is a data breach can be like that accident. A bad enough breach in a certain sector will lead to news stories and will reduce trust among the public, and that can hurt innovation. So protect privacy. Don't have those big disasters happen. It'll help everybody who's trying to do things. And again, consent. Your customers aren't astronauts, because astronauts take great risk, but they're physicists, pilots, who know the science. They have made peace with that risk. Under the GDPR, your customers have to get that same sort of consent. It's nothing, you can still do research. There's been no great impediment. You just have to ask people, you have to be honest with them. So, some people think innovation is just gathering all sorts of data, trying things out without sort of a plan. That's what I call spaghetti against the wall. You just throw it out there and see what sticks. If you're planning for your customers to be people who have racial, gender, economic privilege, that's a fine way to go about things. If people's threat model is minimal or non-existent, fine. Put something out there. Don't have moderation on your social networks. Don't have a way to block people who are creepy. That's great. You've just designed 4chan. We don't need another 4chan. Think about things. Think about those special categories of people. Hire those special categories of people. Diversity is a strength. Diverse teams make better products. They make more money. They're more pleasant to work with. This is something we all should be doing, regardless of any regulation. But now, under the GDPR, that idea has teeth. I'll also say, diversity is not enough. Inclusion. Bring people to the table and actually listen to them. Works on my machine. Also, that's something that doesn't work for technology. If I'm fine with the stock settings, if I don't have stalkers, if I don't have a health condition or a status that makes me more vulnerable, yeah, sure, maybe I will click consent to everything. That's not the case for everybody. Also, coming from the hacker community, works on my hacked machine is also not a valid thing. If I'm annoyed with a device, I will take a sledgehammer or a soldering iron to it and fit it to my purposes, but that is a privileged state. Get feedback, modify things, because people can withdraw consent. So, actual innovation. Plan things out. What sort of data do I want to collect? What am I going to use them for? What's the goal? So use the scientific method. Put out a hypothesis, test it, make that into a theory, test it again, adapt. That's innovation. Research subject ethics. This is Something that's known. Ask people for consent. Let them know what you're going to be gathering, what their experiences, what you're going to be gathering, what their experiences are going to be like, what are the risks, what are the rewards. Run your technology platforms like a pharmaceutical trial. Be open about these things. Again, innovation, it's not something that's cut off by this. It's just that you might need to adapt the methods of other industries. It's multidisciplinary. Again, there's a model for a lot of these things that will be challenges under new regulations that you can use. Talk to other industries. Within your own teams, talk to people. So, Bell Labs, where the transistor was born, no one can argue that they weren't innovative. One of their strengths was that they had the people who were machinists and tool workers working with the physicists, multidisciplinary teams. Big ideas, put them into practice, test them. That's innovation. Get feedback. If you're creating something that annoys your customers or alarms them, then for business purposes, does that make any sense? It's also not a pleasant thing to do. So ask people. Again, they can withdraw their consent at any time, so you're going to have to. And again, diversity. I harp on this a lot, but innovation grows from diversity. Lived experiences are really valuable. Make your company a safe place for people to come and audition for work, for them to speak up about things, because if somebody says, hey, team, we just made a loophole in our tech that a stalker can use, and I know because I had one. Listen to that person. Don't penalize them. Don't fire them. Don't let people harass them. Diversity is a strength. So, said before, new data regulations don't give you new burdens. They may make you aware of some things that you should have been doing in the first place. Make a foundation of good infrastructure. Again, appropriate organizational and technical measures. Know what do you collect, where is it stored, who has access, how are we going to protect these data, and think about the worst case scenarios. So this is nothing more than a good business continuity plan. This is based off of things like, where are your data centers? Is it in a basement that could flood? That would be bad. Does somebody prop open the back doors so that anybody can get in there? That would be bad. What are my passwords like? Am I using a password manager? Or have I given system administrators broad access to everything with an admin password that it's shared among several people? So that if one of those people, if you're about to fire them, if they're working for a competitor, if they're just annoyed with somebody that day, that they don't go in, scoop up a bunch of data, and upload it somewhere. That would be bad. Think about these things. Track who has access to these data, and think about what you need to do when you revoke them. In terms of security, if you learn nothing from a security person ever, don't hard code passwords into the Internet of Things. Don't recycle passwords, and make long passwords. If you do nothing else, then you're above average in terms of companies. A lot of the breaches that happen are because people make really silly mistakes. Don't make silly mistakes. If you're clear about what you're doing and why, you can make your customers clear about what you're doing and why. Why wouldn't you want to be clear about what you're doing and why? Again, don't throw spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. Come up with a plan. Ask for consent. Ask again. Make the tech work for people, because they can withdraw consent. The user experience and security teams need to be at the table from the beginning. I'll give you an example. A lot of privacy people say, well, there's two types of people in the world. There's the one that are fine with Google Home and Alexa and all these privacy-busting technologies, and then there's the rest of us who are full of logic. That's ableist. That's privileged. I would like to see a world in which, if you have a health condition, you can use the devices around you to figure out, okay, what did I eat? What did I do? What are the environmental conditions that have annoyed my immune system to the standpoint where it's eating my joints and I can't use my hands? I want to know those things because that can wreck your plans. But I also want a world in which commercial companies don't gather these data, infer that I have a chronic health condition, and then I get fired. Because that can wreck my plans as well. So, with new regulations, with design thinking, and with the paranoid set at the table, we can create technologies that work for people and protect our privacy at the same time. So don't be afraid of the GDPR, don't be afraid of the privacy people, and don't worry, you can create innovative products. We can usher in a non-dystopian, amazing future and protect privacy at the same time.